In conversation with Tammy Marshall. Tammy Marshall is a Nebraska author with 7 books to her name so far and others in the works. She writes novels, a long-running column about books, newspaper feature articles, poetry, blogs, 2 weekly Substack publication, and other things. She's an avid reader, a travel enthusiast, a motorcyclist, a watercolorist, a retired high school teacher, and a mother of 2 adult children. And on today's episode of Photo Interview, it's my utmost pleasure, joy, and excitement to have on the show today, Tammy Marshall. Welcome on the show, Tammy. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well, thank you. Thank you for having me, Peter.
Yeah, it's my pleasure, really. I'm very excited. I haven't read through some of your works on Amazon. I'm quite excited we are here to sit and talk about it. So I'm very grateful you joining on today. Thanks for coming on.
You betcha.
Yeah. So, Tommy, I need to first say that I was wowed reading through the description page of your novel, Twinges, yeah, on Amazon. The conversation on Nora Matthew, who is an elementary teacher with the ability to predict her student future, and how she got a scary prediction on a student she's afraid what could be done to fix it. Please tell us better. What inspired the storyline of this book, and how you came up with the idea of creating an interesting and uncommon story like this?
Well, I tell you what, as you mentioned, I'm a retired teacher. I taught for 30 years. And
Wow.
in teaching for 30 years, you have a handful of, some students
Experiences.
who are, you kind of wonder how they're going to turn out later on.
Mm,
Um, I was kind of mostly inspired by the expression nature versus nurture. And the sort of like question is, can anybody actually be changed, or are you just born a certain way? And I don't know if you've ever seen this movie, but there's a movie that Macaulay Culkin and Elijah Woods were in 1993 called The Good Son.
oh, wow.
And Macaulay Culkin is just an evil kid. It's an unfortunate thing, and he's an
Wow.
evil kid, and his mother has to make this very drastic decision in the movie. And that movie just like really stuck with me over the years. And I think a little bit of that, uh,
Man.
inspired this. And just the fact too of working with so many students over the years, and every now and then just wondering, like, is this kid going to grow up to do bad things, or are they going to be
Mm,
okay? So in here, this is my only book that involves a serial killer.
mm,
And I call it a soft thriller or a cozy thriller because it's nothing gory. I don't get graphic with anything. But this one is probably my second most popular book so far of
wow.
my 7 books. And the ending of this is the one that a lot of people to talk about. The ending comes as kind of a
Oh,
surprise to them. So, nature versus nurture, that movie, all the different students I taught over the years, those are the
wow.
things that really inspired that book.
Oh, that's a trunk load. That's an handful of experiences you've got in there. 30 years of teaching
Yeah.
experience. That's quite a lot. That would make an amazing CV update. That's quite beautiful to know, you know.
Yeah.
Very
30 years.
amazing. And it's quite enthralling as well how this came to be. This inspired part of the things that inspired the making of the book, which I think
Right.
is quite nice. And also, Tommy, could you tell us about some of the habits you embraced after you left your 30 years teaching career to become a full-time author? I would love to know more
Right.
about that.
I knew when I left teaching, it'll be almost 4 years ago now. At the end of May
Wow.
is when I left. Is when I left to actually go after my true passion, which is writing novels. And I knew that when I left this giant thing of this teaching career,
Hmm.
where my whole life was involved in teaching and coaching and just everything about the school, I knew when I left that I needed to do something to make sure that I went from one giant career into another giant career, which was going to be completely under my control. So I kind of took inspiration from the expression, if not you, then who, which really kind of resonated with me because in all my years of teaching, I was the Spanish teacher, I was the one act coach, I was the speech
Wow.
coach, I was the flag corps coach. I kind of did all of this stuff on my own because I live in a very small town. And so when you're a small town teacher, like everything kind of just gets dumped on you. And so I knew that if I had been able to handle doing all of that stuff on my own as a teacher, that I really could handle doing all of this on my own as a
Oh,
writer. But I also knew that leaving this very, very regimented and very structured, uh, all consuming career and just shutting the door on that in
mm,
May, of 4 years ago, that I needed to do something so that the giant career of writing didn't like overwhelm me. And I don't know if you're familiar with the very popular 90s TV show Friends. There's a character on Friends. His name is Chandler Bing, and he is like kind of anxiety riddled, and sometimes I am a bit too. And he freaks out at the idea of marriage because he sees marriage as this like giant, scary, like
oh,
huge
wow.
thing, right?
Yeah.
And so he kind of runs away from it. And then his friend Ross like talks him off the ledge and says, dude, all you got to do is like one thing, go back to your apartment, and then one more thing, like take a shower, and then one more thing, put on your tuxedo, and then one more thing. And it's sort of like these like one little things that aren't
After
scary at all add up to this giant thing that you can then accomplish like little by little by little by little. So I just
Mm,
decided that going forward, when I left teaching, I was going to make sure that every single day, no matter how busy I might be, but every single day I was going to do at least one thing every single day that would propel my writing career forward, whether it's
wow.
writing or editing or doing an interview or sending out an email. And so I started writing down everything I do in these little journals. See, I
Wow.
even have, if not you, then who? And that's when I started. And I have kept these. Um, and so every single day I write down just the sort of like it's a way for me to look and see how much I've actually accomplished. And it's kind of a way
Yeah.
to keep track of stuff for tax purposes, and
Mm,
just as it kind of keeps myself going, like always forward. So I just know that every single day I don't take a break. Like every single day of every single year, I do at least one thing. Now, most days I
wow.
do many things, but let's say it's Christmas and you have but at least one thing I have to do. So it's always just that propelling yourself forward little by little by
Mm,
little. So that's
mm.
kind of the main thing. And I call it Chandlerizing my life based on that character, Chandler being on that TV show Friends, which is very popular.
I need to say I learned quite a lot from your answer to that question. To do one thing every single day, one
Yes.
thing to keep you going every single
Yeah.
day, one
At least
important
one.
thing to keep
Yeah.
you going
Mhm.
one thing that matters to your life and future to keep you
Mhm.
going,
Right.
one very crucial thing every now and
Right.
then. And
Yeah.
as you keep doing it from day to day, to keep piling up, and it
Right.
matters and matters and matters. That's very beautiful. I think that's
Thank you.
something really very important to utilize, especially as a writer,
Right.
because it might be
Mhm.
very hard sometimes to just find a particular time to sit down and
Right.
write. But if you're doing it gradually, little by
Right.
little, a page a day, 2 pages tomorrow,
Yep.
3 pages
Yep.
the next, before you know what is happening, you're done.
Right. And it could even be like the one thing could be just like an email that I maybe send to a library asking for an appearance a later point. Like maybe that's all I do get done, but that email might lead to the appearance, which might lead to me finding a whole lot more readers, selling books, etc. So, every
Absolutely.
a little thing can become a big thing, but those little things
Absolutely.
added up, also do become a big thing.
Absolutely. I love your take on that. That's quite inspiring.
Thank
Very
you.
inspiring. And I'm picking some points even in there to apply to my life. Very important. We are learning every way. Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. I've written it down already.
All
One
righty.
important thing every day. Thank
Yeah.
you. And Tammy, your description of one of your books too, Clearwater House, it's amazing. And I would like to ask what inspired the making of that? What inspired you to write Clearwater House? And how did you even come up with that title name?
Well, I'll tell you what, Clearwater is a very small town here in Nebraska, not far from where I live right now. And
Mm,
it's only has a few hundred people in it. It's very small, but it's where my family heritage goes back to. So my
oh,
my dad grew up on a farm outside of Clearwater. My mom lived in Clearwater when she was a kid before they moved away.
wow.
But like if you go to the Clearwater Cemetery, which I do a lot, a good third of the people buried there are related to me. So I have a vast family connection in the past to the small town of Clearwater. And uh, so I set my story there, and this was kind of inspired by the expression, if these walls could talk.
Mm.
And I guess I thought once, well, what if they kind of could in a way? And so this is about an artist who inherits an old farmhouse outside of Clearwater from a woman she's never heard of before. And so she goes to the house to try to figure out, like, why is this woman giving me this house? I don't even know her. And the house ended up sort of channeling a story through her into some paintings that tell a story of something that happened there in the past and help solve kind of basically a mystery. And she ends up finding out her connection actually to this house. And so it was really about, again, that if these walls could talk, incorporating my heritage. I kind of set the story where my grandparents' farm had been. I didn't necessarily model the farm, the house on their house by any means, but I just modeled it on like that location. So it was kind of easy to do that setting. This was my very, very first book, and this has been my most popular book still for a variety of reasons. But
That's amazing. That's very amazing. I love the description of that as well. And I need to say that you have such an amazing means of getting inspirations from, which we actually get into later on as we proceed. But that's
yeah,
quite very beautiful, very amazing. Now
thank
let's
you.
go back to Twinges. For the sake of readers who haven't read that yet, and without giving much information away, can you tell us about some of the themes and subject lines we would experience reading up Twinges?
Well, again, I kind of got into that quite a bit, I think. And I will say though, that is sometimes people are really caught up in like trigger warnings. And if I don't have any in my books, but if I were to put one in, that would probably be the only book that I would really say that I'd have some trigger warnings on, because there is some relation to suicide in there. And
Yeah.
I've had definitely had that impact my life. And there is some animals that get injured and in a way that sometimes make people uncomfortable. But if you don't mind, I would like to bring up this one instead. This is my Trouble on Tybee novel, and
Oh,
this one is, I will say, like, this one that kind of relates a little bit with Twinges too, in the sense that we really don't know those that are closest to us, even if we think we do. Like, we never can really know what's in a person's mind, like what they're capable of. And that,
mm,
Twinges is like, she just can't know what her student is really capable of. And in Trouble on Tybee, we have a woman whose mother has died, and she goes to this island, Tybee Island, which is off the coast of Georgia. It's by
yeah.
Savannah. And she goes to her mother's house to like close it up basically because her mother has died. And she and her mom were very estranged, but her mother was a best-selling crime novelist, like fiction crime novelist.
Yeah.
Um, but as this woman is there, she starts learning things about her mom and her mom's past and other members in her family's past. And she starts realizing that her mom was actually maybe not writing fiction. Like, she was
Mm,
actually drawing on some real things and making them fiction. And just the fact that, all the stuff that she never really knew about her mom, and then she ends up finding about her dad who's been missing from her life for a long time, etc. And just that creepiness of, like, we don't really know what's in somebody else's head, and how that can end up negatively or positively, but very negatively impacting us when maybe like the past comes back to, haunt you. So,
oh, wow. That's interesting. That's amazing. That's quite great. And I love your take wholeheartedly on that. And I can go on and on and on and on and on. That's quite beautiful to me, really. Very
thanks.
beautiful. Thank you. Now, could you tell us about the covers of each of your books, as well as who each is dedicated to and why? Because I think behind each cover of a book, there are stories behind it.
Right.
You've got the novel on itself, artwork sometimes communicates stories. I can remember my book's cover, there's a story behind, like, please put a particular character in here, put a light over here, put something over here. Each part of it represents a story, as something very particular to the author. That's one of the reasons why I would love to ask the conversation of, could you tell us about the making of your cover, stuff like that. But then I wanted to ask you, for each of your books, could you tell us about the making of the cover and who each is dedicated to and why?
Sure. So I'll just go back to my first book again. This one again, I wrote a long, long, long time ago. I started writing this in 1993.
Yeah.
Anyway, this cover is actually of a photo of my great grandparents' house that had
Wow.
actually been outside of Clearwater, Nebraska. The house no longer stands. So this is a photo I took of a photo that my mother has hanging up. It's kind of where the whole, like, her whole family, she was a Phil Singer was her last name, where the whole Phil
Wow.
Singer clan kind of came out of. And since
Wow.
my two children are the most important people in my life, this book is actually dedicated to my kids.
Wow.
Uh, my second book that I put together um, was this one, and this is called State of Georgia and Other Writings, and it's about a woman named Georgia and the
Mm.
state in which she finds herself suddenly widowed. But anyway, I put this together. There's a novel and then a novella and two short stories and four poems in this book. And they're all very much feel good stories about second chances in life. And this
Yeah.
book I put together as a dedication to my best friend from college who passed away when she was 50 from cancer. And her name was Amy.
Mm.
So this book is dedicated to Amy. And her favorite colors were blue and pink. And so I messaged my uncle, who was a photographer, and I asked him if he had anything with blue and pink. So he sent me this, and I asked if I could just use it on the cover, and he said, of course, I could use whatever. He was
Wow.
one of my favorite people. And I'm saying was because he has since passed, but he was alive at this time. And
Oh.
so this photo is very important to me because it represents my uncle also.
Mm.
But the color scheme was for my friend Amy
Mm.
Vocek Barron, who passed away when, like I said, when she was 50. This book is dedicated to my parents. My dad was in the military for 20 years, and he served in Vietnam. And this is about a Vietnam veteran. But
Mm.
this cover was drawn by my niece, and it's got a ticker tape parade here. And so and then I just colorized it and made this cover red, white, patriotic thing. So like I said, this one's dedicated to my parents.
Wow.
Twinges, Twinges about the teacher. This one's dedicated to all my past students, none of whom became a serial killer, by the way, but a few
Oh.
of them, who did grow up to be naughty. This cover was also a photo that my uncle took, and by the time I put this book out, he had passed away from
Wow.
COVID. He was only
Oh,
60,
goodness.
and he had kind of colorized this and made it look sort of creepy. And so I thought it was a really good photo. There's a tree, a couple trees in the story that are very important to the story. So anyway, so this was another way for me to keep honoring my uncle. His name was Paul Filsinger, by
Mm.
using another one of his photos. So again, that's dedicated to my
Wow.
students. Trouble on Tybee. This is the only cover photo that I actually bought from somebody. I found this photo on Instagram, and this is on Tybee Island, Georgia. And I thought it was very, very beautiful. So I contacted the photographer and I bought the rights for the photo from him.
Wow.
And it has like kind of a stormy look, but it's also very beachy and very pretty. And there's a fence kind of knocked down here. So it has that ominous feel of
Mm.
like maybe something like bad is going to happen
Oh,
amidst the
wow.
beauty of the island. Uh, this particular one, which we haven't talked about yet, but we will, Her Ride or Die, is another photo my uncle took, Paul Filsinger. And this one very much involves a motorcycle and a mystery, a murder mystery involving it. I have a motorcycle. My motorcycle is brown. It's a
Wow.
brown Harley. I love blue though, it's my favorite color. And my uncle had taken this photo, and I wanted to continue using things that kept my uncle's legacy alive.
Oh,
And
wow.
so I made the motorcycle in this book blue, so I
Mm.
could use this particular photo on the cover. And
Wow.
then the one I just put out, oh, by the way, should go back for a moment. Trouble on Tybee is dedicated to my other best friend in Mexico. She was my first exchange student. Her name is Sylvia.
Wow.
And Her Ride or Die is dedicated to my boyfriend. We both have motorcycles. We're American Legion riders. We met through that because of
Oh,
our bikes, so that's dedicated to him.
oh,
Last in the Class is the one I just released in January.
oh.
This is another photo my uncle took, Paul Filsinger. This is not about birds by any means, but there are two very important people in the book and a third that helps them out immensely. And it's kind of about, and it was a little bit ominous with these clouds and stuff, but there's also sort of the shape of a heart here, and you
Mm,
can kind of see. And there's definitely a love story amidst the mystery and the deaths and the problems that happen also in this. I dedicated this one to my fellow high school classmates, 1986 class of Norfolk High School
oh,
here in
wow.
Nebraska, and to my good friend Sharon from college, who who had me come down to Florida last year for the first time in my life. And so, because of that, part of the story is set in Florida.
Oh,
And she's been very supportive of me as an author too, just as my friend Amy had been. So, I really appreciate that and wanted to kind of give the love back to her that she's given to me.
oh, wow. That's quite amazing, really. I love your take on that. That's quite beautiful. And that's one of the reasons why I mentioned that every cover has a story behind it.
Yeah.
I love listening to your story. I love the way you talk about them passionately. The rawness is quite very real, very beautiful, quite great. The stories are quite compelling, very interesting. And I love the fact that you had to mention them in here. I mean, in the recorded interview that's going to stay on the internet forever, where people watching can also get to see that, oh, yeah, this is where the story is coming from. These are the motivation behind this cover.
Yeah.
I particularly love the one that has to do with the house that your grandparents lived in the past. That's
Yeah.
very amazing. And the other
Right.
ones are very quite beautiful. These are storytelling in itself in picture format. And that's one of the beauty of art. We have art in storytelling, art even in sculpture, art in painting, art in drawing, art in
Yep.
pictures, stories everywhere. An image could have its own story, a lot of it. I'm very grateful for you mentioning and sharing all of these amazing stories. Thank you so much.
Yeah, and I really I do a lot of author appearances and I love talking about the covers. And that's one thing that as an independent author, a self-published author, like I have full control over that. And I really like that aspect of it. I mean, there are so many beautiful covers that marketing teams come up with out there when they publish books.
Mm,
But I love the fact that like I get to make my covers have very personal meanings,
mm,
um, except for the one exact that I bought. But I still think this is a really pretty picture. Um, and I have been to Tybee Island, but the other ones, keeping as often as I can keep my uncle's legacy alive, I'm going to do it. I have a few
mm,
others. He was just a wonderful photographer,
mm.
but so it's important to
Wow,
me.
that's beautiful. That's very great. Thank you for sharing once again. And now let's go into the topic of readers' feedbacks. Because, Tammy, one of the most interesting thing to me as a writer is to sit back and listen to readers' feedbacks. You may want to agree with me that one of the things that makes literature to be complex in its entirety is the fact that it can be interpreted in different ways by different readers based on their opinions. Sometimes the readers might get the message intended by the author. Sometimes they might be close to getting the message. Sometimes they might be far, say several kilometers or even meters or even miles away from
Yeah,
getting the message. And most times they might just hilariously misunderstand the message and interpret the book upside down.
yeah.
As interestingly fun as they sound, I would like to ask you, how do you feel when readers interpret your works differently than you intended? How does that make you feel?
I actually get kind of a kick out of it because that's exactly what's going to happen. I'm for the most part when
Oh,
they come up with something, I don't know, completely different. Five of my seven novels are very much mystery suspense books. So for the most part, it's just a compelling story that, a page turning story. It's
mm,
not very confusing necessarily. But they still will every now and then they'll ask me a question and I'll just think I don't even know where you got this from. But and the other two are very much like feel good type of stories. Um, but I know that as a reader myself, like, and I'm in a couple different book clubs, that
Oh,
we'll be talking about a book, and you sometimes just wonder if everybody in the group even read the same book. So I know that, yeah, as a reader, I will take things from a book that other people don't. So I completely
yeah,
understand that that will happen with with my books too. So um I don't know. For the most part, readers have always have enjoyed them a lot. I go talk
yeah.
to book clubs about my books. Probably Twinges is the one that every now and then people will ask me about the end. Some people really get the ending, and others don't quite get the ending. And then I have to just, steer them in the right direction. And then they say, "Oh, that's the ending." And Twinges has kind of um, taken probably the most people by surprise. But
Oh, wow.
no, I get a kick out of some of the questions that they ask me, what
Wow.
it is that they decide is important to fixate on, for example. Like in the Clearwater House, I actually had a guy get mad at me because I have an
Wow.
old man in there who has he's in a nursing home and he's like chewing gum or something. And this
Oh,
guy was
wow.
like, "You would not be allowed to be chewing gum in a nursing home." And I think, okay, I'm
Wow.
sorry that I made that mistake, but maybe that's not what you should be fixating on
It's not
when
what you're
there's this whole
expecting.
giant story. I just think it's funny what people like nitpick about, or that they take from it that you didn't even intend.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. This is very, like you mentioned, you can be in the same garden of book club reading and the way they will interpret it. I love that statement. It makes me laugh. And be wondering, did you read the same book or it's a different book here? Or
Yeah.
it's a different book you're reviewing. It's always very
Yeah.
funny, really, because I think, and that's why people bring in ideas from different manner. You read the book,
Yeah.
you interpret it separately from the second person, from the third person, and the fourth person is given an entire different interpret. So everybody tends to interpret based on their own understanding, how they could relate to the story, and how they could apply it to their own life, how it resonated with them, etc. So some could say,
Exactly.
but even the best of books that some would give 5 stars, some would say, oh no, 1 star, two
Yep.
star, or
Yep.
even 0 star if possible, etc. So it's quite a beautiful response you've got in there. Love your take on that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks for sharing. Now, could you also tell us a bit about ticker tape? I know we've talked about it initially, but I'd like you to expand more. Ticker tape as well.
Yeah. So this is actually the only book where my main character is a guy. I tend to write about women because I am a woman, but Marvin Wineski is my Vietnam veteran in here, and he's kind of a washed up Vietnam veteran. And the Vietnam veterans, by and large, were kind of mistreated when they came back to the United States.
Oh,
And
wow.
so, but this is a story of kind of redemption and second chances, and how he later goes back to Vietnam and reconnects with a woman that he had met there when he was there, and how
Mm,
once again it changes his life for the better. So it's kind of taking a bad thing and making it good.
yeah.
But this particular story came to me from the very first sentence, which popped into my head one day while
Yeah.
I was proctoring my seventh graders while they were taking a test, a standardized test. I was just walking around the room, and the very first sentence in this story, which I left completely as it is, I didn't change it because of how the story came from it, was simply confetti rained down upon him. That's all it was. And then from that, I kind of got this image of this washed up, crippled Vietnam veteran in a wheelchair being pushed down uh, the streets of New York City while ticker tape parade is going on around him, which did happen in 1985. There was a ticker
Oh,
tape
wow.
parade for the Vietnam veterans, and how him being in that parade, which was kind of the catalyst to leading him eventually later going back to Vietnam.
Mm,
Um, so I really like my character Marvin a lot. He's kind of a like washed up, grumpy, miserable man at the beginning. But then we go back and kind of see how he was before
mm.
the Vietnam War, and his ex-wife is involved in the story, and then this other woman in Vietnam is involved too. And then I also have a poem at the end of this that is about where I stand flag lines at military funerals as an American Legion writer. And so I wrote this poem that's about standing a flag line at these military funerals, and it's
Yeah.
dedicated to the memory of my boyfriend's middle son, who was in the Air Force, and he took his life April 2nd of 2019, PTSD reasons. And we
Wow.
know that there are about an average of 22 veterans every single day here in the United States who take their own lives.
Hmm.
And it's kind of a very important cause to us to do what we can to stop that. So
I've got it.
I have that at the back of this book as well.
Wow, that's so sad and quite emotional to know, really. I love the fact that you had to do that in response of creating awareness, because people actually need to be aware of that. Thanks for sharing with us. Thank you. And just apart from the books we've mentioned so far, I know you've showed a bit to the camera initially when we're talking about the cover. Yeah. But just apart from the books we've mentioned so far in conversation, do you have any other works you've authored or say currently working on?
Well, as I mentioned, I just recently released this one,
Looks like
Last in the
that.
Class. And so this is the one I'm kind of like right now trying to actively promote a little bit and work up some appearances. And this one is about a lady who leaves small town Iowa.
Wow.
She graduated in 1960 and she leaves small town Iowa, so she's never going to come back. And then 50 years later, she does return to their class reunion. And at the class reunion, there is this letter that gets read basically saying that whoever is the last surviving member of their class is
Yeah.
going to inherit millions of dollars. And
Oh.
so then that leads to a bunch of deaths happening because somebody somewhere wants this money. So she and another classmate, William, do reconnect, and it tells their story and this mystery, this suspense that's trying to get,
Wow.
solved, like who's actually behind the deaths of all their classmates.
Oh
And
wow.
then Her Ride or Die is about a high school principal here in Nebraska, and she buys herself a motorcycle, and she's in her 50s, like me, and she knew that the previous owner of this motorcycle was deceased. She was buying this motorcycle used, but she
Oh.
didn't know anything beyond that. But turns out there was a lot more to him being deceased, and he was actually murdered, and his spirit or ghost kind of like takes over some of her rides and leads her to solve the mystery of his death. So
Mm. Oh
that's why
wow.
it's called Her Ride or Die. And that's kind of a play on that because if somebody's your ride or die, they're your like important person. And she does meet a guy who becomes kind of her ride or die, her important person. But it's also like she's got to ride or die because this spirit takes over essentially. And
Wow.
then I do have some other stuff in the works, but I haven't quite settled on which one I'm going to fully write next.
Mm.
But I do have people already bugging me. They got this one and they've already read it and they say, "When's the next one coming?" And I'm like, "I took a whole year to write this one, so you're going to have to calm down. It's going to be a little
Let's
while."
do it gradually.
Exactly. Exactly. Remember, one thing at a time. I can
Let's
only
do
do
it.
so
Yeah.
much.
One after the other, please. Don't rush me so I don't go
Yeah.
make some mistakes.
Yeah. And as you mentioned at the beginning, I also do write a regular column. I've written that for 15 years for
Mm.
a newspaper in Norfolk, Nebraska, and it's about
Wow.
books. It's called Novel Thoughts. And I write two Substack things. One is about words. It's called Cognate Cognizance. And it's
Oh.
about improving your vocabulary and the fact that you make connections between a word like in Spanish, which is the language I taught, and
Mm.
then you can make that connection with its cognate in English, and you can improve your Spanish and your English at the same time. And
Absolutely.
then the other one is called Tomes and Topics, and I just write about kind of something relevant either to my life or to my writing each week. And then I also share a portion of my next work in progress with my paying
Mm.
subscribers on that. So
That's beautiful. That's a lot you've mentioned in there. I mean, I love your take on that. That's very amazing. Very amazing. Thank you so much for mentioning. Thank you so much. And just in case we have some viewers who are currently watching this interview and would love to get a copy of any of your books, On what platform are they available on for purchase?
Well, of course, they're available through Amazon. That's where they're published through their print on demand process. So you can go buy a paperback or ebook, and they're all available in the Kindle Unlimited thing. But they're also in the expanded distribution. So really, if you go to any bookstore,
Wow.
and say you wanted, the bookstore could order it for you. So, like if you wanted to support your local bookstore, your
Mm,
bookstore could order it through the expanded distribution, and that we could support your, local bookstore as opposed to conglomeration of Amazon. But
absolutely.
for ease on Amazon, of course, but honestly, a bookstore can order it for you and get it shipped to that
That's
bookstore.
great. That's great. Thank you so much for mentioning. And I left a link in the description part of this interview where interested viewers can get a copy of Tammy Marshall's books directly on Amazon and Barnes& and Nobles on our website and also on other platforms. I also left a link to our social media pages for possible followings. So thank you so much, Tammy, for
Yep.
accepting the invitation to be featured on P English Literature. I must say this is more than awesome. Very great, quite exciting having this conversation around your beautiful titles you've got in there. They're quite great, they're quite evocative, they're quite interesting, and I enjoy this conversation heartedly. Thank you so
Thank
much
you.
for coming on.
Yeah, well, thank you again for having me.
Yeah, it's my pleasure, really. That was great.